Oh, really?
Yeah. But that was the first of all of the Christmas shows that was done as a television special in January after they came back. Up to this point, after 1946, up to 1955, he would go out and he would do the shows, but the best you would get is a little bit of newsreel footage, or they might shoot a little bit for publicity, such as Ann Miller on the deserts of Egypt, doing Too Darn Hot, the same routine she does in Kiss Me Kate, she does on the sands, and it's very interesting. But when you have him photographing the entire show, the reaction to going to the hospitals and telling sort of the stories of what they were doing, this, I think, is why it became such a standard for the next 20 years in every American household. His shows were unbelievably popular. People forget that he would, the Christmas shows in particular, would knock out all of the competition, whether it was, no matter what the popular show was of the day. When you had the Bob Hope Christmas show, he would pull 75% of the audience.
My goodness, you mean 75% of the country?
The whole country at the time, yes.
My goodness, that's high.
Also the fact that, for...
Today they can't get 10%.
Well, it's also true that, from his radio time from 1938 right up to his death, he was the leading star for NBC, first in radio under the Hooper polls, and then when he went to television, it's amazing that, the Nielsen ratings always had him in the top 10, even though he never pulled a weekly program. They wanted him to do a weekly program, and he said, no, I'll do a special once a month or once every other month, but I don't want to be tied down to a weekly show. In fact, his daughter, Linda, told the audience that he was going to do, when in 1953, I believe, he was all ready to sign a contract with NBC to do a weekly program, and he was arguing back and forth, well, will I be exposing too much? Will this mess up my radio work or my movie work? And it was only after breakfast, as he shuffled out of the breakfast room at his house, that he decided that this was a bad idea, and even though the lawyers had written up the contracts, he refused to sign.
Really?
And he said later on it was the best and the smartest thing he ever did, because it kept him as a special, not just someone who would come and go in 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, even that. He was, do you remember that he stayed loyal to NBC when Paley made the rush on CBS and took Red Skelton and Jack Benny and all the others?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and he
He was
stayed...
very proud of the fact that he, the people who had given him his first break, he would stay with as long as they wanted him.
Really? Yeah.
Oh, no, and they recently had an auction of some of his memorabilia. They have warehouses of this stuff. That was done on the Queen, I think it was the Queen Mary II, back in September. They raised well over $660,000, and all of the money that was raised at the auction of, especially his sports memorabilia from the last 40 years, was going right to charities, especially military, for military hospitals, widows of military men who were killed. That was one of his real specialties. And Linda Hope is in charge of the Bob Hope Legacy. They've now changed the name of his corporation from BobHope.com to the Bob Hope Legacy.
Where was the Queen Mary at the time?
That's a good question. Unfortunately, I was in California with Catherine Crosby when they were having the luncheon. So I got to miss out on it. I can't tell you exactly, but I have the information in the other room, but I'm not going to go look for it right now.
I was at NBC Hollywood, Sunset and Vine.
Yes, I think this was the auction. I think was the Julian Corporation did it, and I know they had a big catalog, and they raised a lot of money for charity, and Linda was very, very pleased. And this was even a month after the stock market crumbled.
Ooh.
That's nice to know that he meant so much to so many people that they wanted a golf club or a tie or various sports memorabilia. And commented, every time he would go out on a tour or do a public appearance, he would get something that would go into his office. He had glass cases, and he would put these new items in, and he would take out some of the old material, and that would then go into storage. And obviously, he never threw out anything. And the best thing of all I did discover was that he had a great secretary from the time that he went out to Hollywood in 1938. And for over 40 years, this woman kept a copy of every fan letter that was sent to him, and she also put a carbon of the letter that he would write back to the people. And that included every serviceman who was in our serviceman's family who contacted them, and this has all been given to the Library of Congress recently.
Oh, really?
And it's about it's between 21 and 34,000 items. Not individual items, but pairs of items. So it's the one time you get to see the letter and the response. And she kept meticulous records over the years.
And she also autographed some things for him.
Oh, yes.
Where does the Museum of Broadcasting, used to be Broadcasting, of Radio and Television come in? Do they have anything from him?
They have some material, but you've already said the important thing. He wasn't a CBS star. The Museum of Television and Radio is primarily
that's Paley.
For CBS.
Yeah, Paley started that.
Yep, he did, and they will have, I know they have a number of shows and items in the collection, but the length and breadth is not there. They have a few things, but not much. But then they have, with all of the performers, they aren't the Library of Congress. They're not a repository like the National Archives.
Okay. I was at the NBC Studio A, in the year 1952, and he was doing his radio program. It was taped at that time. And one of his people came in and said that a Marine or somebody was dying at San Luis Obispo, and all he wanted was to see Bob Hope before he died. And Bob Hope took off.
Of course. He made some wonderful comments about the first time that he was invited. He and his group, Skinny Innes, Francis Langford, were invited out to March Field in 1941.
Jerry Colonna.
Yeah. Oh, please. About 7 months before we entered the Second World War. And he said the reaction that he got from these guys sitting 5,000 on a tarmac was amazing. He said he never got a jolt like that when he went into vaudeville, when he did Broadway, when he did movies. He said it was the biggest thrill of his life, and he was always amazed and eternally grateful to the public for appreciating his small contribution.
Yeah.
And he really, Linda concurred. She said her father really thought that especially the Christmas shows were some of the most important things that he ever did. And even though she, as a small child, said, early on she resented not having Daddy around at Christmas, she quickly got over that, as did her 3 siblings.
Oh.
By the way, later on, each of the siblings got to go on some of the Christmas shows to be with Daddy. Not the whole family, but you might get Tony going with him in 1956. You would get, Linda herself going in the late 1950s, early 60s. And she's an amazing character herself. She's a judge out in California.
Isn't that interesting? What are the others?
Besides running the
Bob Hope Legacy?
A little legacy.
Yeah.
She also is a standing judge.
A standing judge. I don't know what that is. I've heard of a
Just the fact that she...
I've heard of a sitting judge. I never heard of a standing judge.
Well, standing that some judges, of course, work periodically. She's constantly working and trying cases. And she's a phenomenal individual.
Where did she go to law school?
That I couldn't tell you. I'm sorry. I don't know where she attended law school.
And what are the other 3?
Very proud of the fact that she is not only a Californian, but that she's from Burbank. In fact, when we were introducing her to to our audience, she was very concerned that we said she was from Burbank, and she was a Burbank resident.
Yeah, he lived in Burbank.
Well, no, that's where he had his offices, and that's where.
Well, for a time he lived in North Hollywood and had his offices.
Yeah, but that was when he was far more active.
Mm. Oh,
But,
okay.
You know, and it's just as I learned from the staff and from everyone involved. Bob Hope was always with half of a suitcase filled in the hallway. You know, he was always willing to go any place he was needed or wanted.
He was a great traveler. I met him at St. Bonaventure, which is one of our colleges in way western New York, and Dolores Reed was there that day. I saw him again at the Eastern States Exposition in Springfield, Massachusetts.
The biggie, I know it well.
I saw him again in New Rochelle, New York, Westchester County. And as a youth, I was a great fan of Bob Hope, and I collected 4 huge scrapbooks. Back before you were born, scrapbooks were about 18 inches by 30 inches. And I filled 4 of them. And when I saw him in NBC Hollywood, I said, "Do you want them?" And so I think I sent him 2. And he said send them to his secretary, and he gave me the address. And then when I saw him in New Rochelle, I asked him, did he want the other 2? And he said yes. He said, give them to Bill Faith. And we were all standing in a queue. Hope was in front. I was doing the charity, giving the scrapbooks, and next was Faith. So we had Hope, Faith, and Charity.
Very good.
Yeah, that was good. He gave me a good interview on television, on videotape, about people starting out in show business, for the children starting out in show business.
He also, I mean, it was amazing. One of the things that I was very proud of is we had the documentary that Linda did on her father, and quite often with some of the documentaries, the quality is less than perfect. It's amazing to see what happens when you have saved your entire archive of film and video, and you can take clips that are in superb condition.
Really?
Really great condition. And she did this for A&E about 10 years ago, and it's an absolutely spectacular documentary.
Really?
It was, if you look on the program, it's that last series that I did, Bob Hope, something, I forget the half title.
Oh, well, I'll give it to you.
Uh-huh.
It's right here. Personal appearance by Linda Hope, Bob's daughter, and series. Then what you want to say? What did you want to recall?
Well, I couldn't remember what the title of her documentary was that she made.
Oh, okay. You say it's on the end of the program?
It was that last program. It was the first thing that we showed.
Mm-hmm. LPA gratefully acknowledges Donnell Library Center.
No.
Okay.
I was looking for the name of the actual documentary that we showed that she made.
Chrysler Theater.
For the 25th of November.
Chrysler Theater? Yeah. Bob Hope's America's Entertainer DVD, Chrysler Theater.
Yeah, no,
her
it was
school.
Bob Hope, Great American Entertainer, which really is one of those things that stands up with the Ken Burns as a wonderful piece, not just of the life of the career of the individual, but also giving you insights into the individual himself.
Oh, good, yes.
And that's very rare when you're dealing with documentaries. Usually you'll get one side or the other. And the family, showed all of the pluses and minuses, and it's really fantastic.
Yes, you're right. We have been told, it's hearsay, I don't have any personal knowledge of this, that DVD is not going to be a good archive.
Well, DVD gives you, I'm not going to get heavily into the discussion of blue glue and CD and DVD as the ultimate. Our collection, we still preserve in the format that it was made. So we still preserve, and we do grants on 16 millimeter. We have preserved over 340 preserved. For instance, Susan Sontag made a film called Promised Land. She's well known as a writer. People forget she was a filmmaker. Unfortunately, it was about peace in the Middle East, and it came out 6 months before one of the major wars. And when she died, her son requested that this be shown at all the memorial services in America and in Europe. We were very pleased about that. So we're concerned as well. So we try to preserve on film if possible, or if it's 2-inch videotape, we've done preservation of some of the, this is the New York Public Library. We have done a lot of preservation in the format. The only time you sometimes steer away from it is when you have a format that's totally gone, such as 2-inch video master. that was de rigueur in the 1960s. We did one of those for Judith Perlman, a lost documentary on Glenn Gould, where Glenn Gould not only appears but creates a song for this particular documentary called Going North that was made in the late 1960s. There, we did not preserve it on 2-inch. We went for everything from Digibeta, Beta SP, half-inch, and DVD because we didn't know if we could run it through the machine more than once. So you try to preserve it in every format you can. Otherwise, we stick strictly to the original.
Oh, I want to tell you a sad experience. In 1972, Sony came out with the Portapack.
Uh-huh.
You know, the little half-inch reel-to-reel?
Oh, I remember it well.
Yeah. Well, when they first came out with their tapes, they didn't put a backing on the tape, and it was fine. And it lasted me, 20, 30 years. But then they got smart, and they put a backing on it, and guess what? During storage, that backing dropped down onto the tape, so that on every revolution, you got an out. And it just ruined things. You know what I mean? The backing blocked it out. The glue.
Oh, I know. Well, it's even like 3/4 inch that we were using back in 72 to 78. A lot of that now is dried out to such an extent that you get large chip outs that look like paint.
Really?
Breaking off the heads on your equipment.
Oh my
At
goodness.
At $400 a head, that becomes a very expensive procedure.
Well, I'll have to take.
A lot of archives in the 1970s where they were trying to do oral history from communities did use 3/4 inch, and I hope that they have looked at this material, that they've stored it vertically, and they've kept it in a 30 to 40 degree temperature with 50% relative humidity.
What is that?
What?
40 for 50%?
You want 40 to 50% relative humidity, and the closer you can get down to freezing, the better. The cold is better than heat. Heat is the worst thing for film, videotape, everything else.
You don't
want ice crystals, so you want it, 34, 36, 38 degrees.
Oh, a young graduate student from Rensselaer Polytech Institute in major in fine arts. She came to my museum, and she got some of those 3/4 inch that you spoke of.
Yes.
And she's making a documentary, and she got through them fine. They went through fine.
Okay, well, it depends on how you stored it.
Well, I'm sorry to say they're in a storage trailer, and they're out there in the summertime, and they're out there in the wintertime.
Well, I would be careful of monitoring. It may be fine now, but just be assured that I guarantee you within 10 years, you will be chipping bits and pieces off of your tapes will be chipping from it because
72 to 82 to 92. No, 30 years.
Yeah.
They've been in there 30 years.
But remember, that doesn't mean that they won't self-destruct within the next year.
Well, I'm glad you told me that.
So that's one thing that, even if you have to do, I hate to say the transfer even to a DVD or a half-inch, as a stopgap measure, it gives you a little bit more time to worry.
Oh.
A lot of this material is valuable where you only have one copy.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Yes. I wanted to tell you that when I was at NBC Hollywood, I was running the mimeograph machine for the script service department. And they used to send me up to Studio A with the last-minute changes. And anyway, I got to meet quite a few people there. and Bob Hope let me do a monologue on one of his after shows. If he liked the audience and he thought they were responsive, he would have an after show, and he let me do it.
Well, as I said, he and his family really have a wonderful sense of commitment and gratitude, I think, for everything good that's happened in their lives. And they really have a true sense of trying to give back for all of the blessings that they've received.
Oh, yes, have they ever. God has been good to them.
The thing I always felt worse for Bob Hope was just as he was making big time, of course, and had moved his mother into the new house in the early 1930s, that's when her cancer kicked in.
No.
So she really didn't have a chance to see him as a great star. She saw him rising out of vaudeville, Broadway, but she really didn't have a chance to see.
Oh, yeah.
Really took off because it's 1938 that's his key year. That's the year he gets the two-picture deal at Paramount. That's the year that he goes on the Pepsodent program, Radio Live.
Yep, that's
and he was also doing Red Hot and Blue on Broadway with Ethel Merman and Jimmy Durante.
Well, this is where he met Dolores Reed, wasn't it, on Broadway?
That was a few years earlier. That was 1934.
Yes, and
33, 34.
And her mother was very protective of her.
You had to be. This was an occupation where girls' reputations could be ruined very quickly. And remember, Dolores is a very, very devout Catholic.
Oh, very.
Yes.
Oh, yes, very. Good for her. And so are the Crosbys, right?
Yes, they are.
Mm-hmm. As a Protestant, I'll appreciate that. I remember Bob Hope appearing at the Museum of Broadcasting around about the 1970s. He did there. And I asked him, did you change your, let's see, how did that go? Did you change your name from, he was Leslie Towns Hope, did you change your name from Les Hope to Bob Hope because backwards Les Hope is hopeless? And all the people laughed, and he said, I'm doing the jokes around here.
Yeah. You can set him up for him, but the best thing that I was able to find out was one of my favorite comedians, you mentioned him before, was Jerry Colonna. And I always loved Jerry Colonna when I was growing up. I enjoyed his appearances in television, movies, when he was doing commercials. I was asking Linda about him, and she said it was rather tragic that, he had a series of strokes that eventually rendered, he lost his voice, but he didn't lose his mind, and he would have a slate board with him, and he would write quips and do jokes, and he was just as outrageous right up to the end of his life.
Oh my goodness.
And he actually came back from the first stroke, and he continued to tour with Bob as long as he was going to Vietnam, and obviously was very, very close, and this was one of those things that obviously truly tore up Bob Hope, was that his old friend, unfortunately, eventually wound up in an institution.
Yeah.
Even still, he was such a talent.
Who, Jerry, yeah.
Yes, and people don't know him today.
Yeah. He had a great face. I loved his eyes.
Well, that was one of the reasons I loved one of the 1956, one of the shows, because every place that they went, they had him sitting in the audience with his handlebar mustache, dressed up in a different uniform from all the services, so that you saw him as a Marine heckling Bob Hope. You saw him as a Navy man. You saw him as a flyer, as an Army person, etc.
Oh, yeah.
But then watching the two of them do their routines in the hospitals, that I think was really touching, was the fact that they really knew how to make the injured servicemen feel better by treating them as if they were on the street or the circus, rather than no one being quiet, making lots of noise, trying to jump into bed with the nurses, splashing bedpan as if they were cymbals. And that, I think, is also part of the reason I think that Bob Hope became so beloved in this country.
Oh, yes, no question about it.
Unfortunately, as Linda said, her father hung out with presidents and with generals. So he had a totally different perspective of the Vietnam War than she she loved her father dearly, but her politics were quite different than her father's. She understood why he was that way, but that, unfortunately, I think was one of the downsides to Bob Hope's career, was the fact that he unfortunately believed the whole military complex that, we had to do this in Vietnam, we had to stay there, and what the generals were saying was correct because they had been correct in the Second World War.
Yeah. Well, we can't let that spoil it. I wanted to tell you at NBC when I showed him the scrapbooks, and he looked at them, and he said to his agent, "She has more pictures of me than you do." Well, I always impressed.
They have a huge office with all their material, and as I said, they were very great. For instance, you were asking about DVD before. I will say they offered us 35 millimeter on everything that we could have shown.
They did?
I chose not to use 35 millimeter because it would have cost us a fortune to transport it cross country. And unfortunately, we have, as a public institution, open to all, we have to pay New York Projectionist Union rates to show things to the public.
Oh, you do?
Oh, we do. We have to, we have to pay them whether we show it in DVD or in video. We pay different according to the format.
Oh my goodness!
It would have cost us several $1,000s per program if we had chosen to use 35 millimeter, which is why we chose not to show it in the original format.
Oh yeah.
But they were wonderful in making it available to us.
Yes, they
and
were.
I can't speak high enough about the family because they really came through for us, and I think they really also appreciated that this was the second time in New York that there had been a Bob Hope retrospective. About 10 years ago, they had one at Film Society of Lincoln Center, and he was there, and Linda was there. And this time, since his death, we really wanted to highlight the man and his tremendous contribution, and the fact that I hope you noticed that we showed probably his most dramatic film, which is Bo James, which is a wonderful film. And it should have led him to another dimension of his career. He should have become a very good dramatic actor. But Paramount didn't do this. They let him make these films. And
I'm glad they didn't. I think that's sort of a dichotomy.
No, except that, there's no one like a comedian to know about human emotion and tragedy. The clowns can always turn out a great dramatic role, be it Milton Berle, Fred Skelton. It doesn't work the other way around. Very few dramatic actors can pull off even light comedy, let alone, more intense comedy. But I will say that Linda passed on to us. We were talking about films because I was asking about his relationship with his producer, Paul Jones, who did most of his great films in the 40s. And she said she really felt that when her father had less to do with the